In my love life, I was attracting unavailable men. I was self-sabotaging healthy relationships, and I found myself being attracted only to men who treated me really poorly.
The avoidant person starts to chase because they're starting to fall in love with the idea of the person and picking up on the breadcrumbs that they enjoy.
How come I'm this incredible woman that is perfected in my career, but when it came to my love life, it was, as I would say, excuse my French, an absolute shit show.
It's familiar, it's what we know, it's what we're kind of programmed into from a young age. This is how love is, this is what love feels like. Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of the Authentic Man podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers. I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. And with the guest that we have on today, my wonderful partner I'm a couples coach. So we're talking about our relationship, but actually we're talking about the very thing that I see a lot of couples struggle with, which is this anxious avoidant trap. If you've read the book Attached, which is a really good book, or you can find, I've got another podcast, a couple podcasts back about the avoidant tendencies. We actually talk about how can you create a successful relationship when you're anxious and avoidant. You know, we go into the details about, you know, what those two attachment styles are like, because I'm avoidant, also anxious, and we've made a really thriving and beautiful relationship. We talk about some of the strategies to really connect deeply, to ask what we need, to understand the other as well, because that's something I think happens a lot, is we just sit in our silo of being anxious or avoidant and think that the other person is terrible and bad and wrong and needy and so forth without really understanding them and where they're coming from. And we talk about a lot of the kind of issues that we've dealt with in our relationship and how we've overcome them and how we've, you know, come to a place where we really respect each other's kind of way of being. Like that might be my need for space or her need for closeness and reassurance. And actually do so respectfully, actually, and lovingly, because there really is a place where you can start to do the healing work around your attachment style inside of the relationship. It doesn't have to be something that you're doomed for failure to never work. But before we jump into the episode, just let you know, I've got a men's program coming up. It's a 12-week program for men. It starts in September, and it's at September, October, and November. And it really is taking men through how to cultivate the kind of deep, present, loving, healthy masculinity that is so possible for us men, that is really shifted and changed my life, and it shifts and changed the lives of my clients. And I take you through a lot of the amazing ways in which we can grow, helping men really step into a new type of range within the program. But the thing I think that's the most important thing about the program, really, the men's program, is that you're surrounded by a group of kind of conscious and like-minded, growth-minded men, something that most of us, if not 99% of men, do not have in their lives. I know outside of some of the spaces that I've created and been in, you know, I don't have that many necessary kind of old friends who can hold this sort of capacity for conversation, for care, for support, for loving challenge, and so forth. You know, the details about the program are in the show notes. I've added some testimonials, as well as a link that you can go to and you can register your interest to sign up. But enough about the program, and I'll let you jump into the episode. And yeah, so I have also with me, also Baav, who's my partner, my lover, my girlfriend, depending on what time of day I feel like, talking about her. And I guess to start with, it's worth just starting, for those of you that don't know us, also like, how did you come to do the work that you do today?
So I started to do inner work about 7 years ago. I came to a point where I actually had a full-on breakdown in my life after overdoing everything and being completely disconnected from my body and my emotions. So it forced me into some important reflection time of, in my career, I was making waves and I was highly successful. Yet in my love life, I was attracting unavailable men. I was self-sabotaging healthy relationships, and I found myself being attracted only to men who treated me really poorly. So I started to just reflect and go, how come I'm this incredible woman that is reflected in my career, but when it came to my love life, it was, as I would say, excuse my French, an absolute shit show. And I was just done. I wanted to share my life with someone, but I wanted to feel loved and seen and cared for. So that's how I started my inner work journey.
Indeed. And what is the work that you do, just for the listeners? Like, what magic do you bring to the world now?
So much magic. So I work with women. I tend to work with high achieving women who want to be just as successful in their love life as they are in their career. So I specialize in how to attract a conscious man. And to just quote, 80% of my women do meet an incredible man only within 12 months of working with me. And also how to grow their romantic relationship. As I often speak about, men are amazing, relationships are really cool. And have you met the most unapologetic, empowered, liberated version of yourself? That's the real magic. So it's some real deep work on creating a strong foundation of self as you create everything your heart desires.
Yes. Amen to that. Amen, especially to the bit that men are amazing. I think that's a message that, I'm sure there's many women's coaches out there that are not singing that message very loudly, actually sing a message of men are bad, men are evil, men are wrong. But as we know, that doesn't help very much with one's dating life, does it, when you're a woman at all?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I do find myself in coaching, not that I'm, taking sides, but pretty much every time I'm like, okay, what's the view, the perception of the man? What's his view of this situation? So I don't go into narrative. I just reflect back so that they can take a conscious view, because we all have stories. So it's very important.
Exactly. And those stories running most people's lives, and they believe it to be truth.
Yeah. And, talking about my own inner work journey, the first book I got about dating is How to Date Men When You Hate Men, because that was my reflection 7 years ago due to sexual and emotional trauma in early relationship. I found it very hard to open back up to men. I wanted to, but as the title suggested, I wasn't very open-hearted yet. But that was my aspiration and how I live now.
I think the second book she read was Why Men Love Bitches.
That's correct. Which actually is pretty much all about boundaries, which I never used to have any.
Yeah.
Either.
Indeed. So as we jump into this episode, we can talk about the kind of anxious avoidant trap, because if you've read Attached, it talks about anxious and avoidant people. And it paints a pretty bleak picture, I feel, of a relationship between someone who's anxious and avoidant. And we're here to say that it doesn't have to be the case. We've had many clients whose relationships are two people who are anxious and avoidant. I think that's literally every single one of our joint couples coaching clients. Sorry, the words just left me there. Joint couples coaching clients have been avoidant man, anxious woman.
Yeah.
And not to say that all women are anxious and all men are avoidant. That's just been what's been attracted to us, because that's the mirror that we put up into the world. We also put out the mirror of like how you can make that work. So we're going to talk about that in the episode. But I'm going to start with what are attachment styles? Also is very good at this. Much better at answering this.
So attachment style very much relates to how our overall needs, and especially our emotional needs, were met, or in this case, not met by our parents. So our attachment style starts to form already from infancy, meaning when you are conceived, to 4 years old. And they start to influence all your social interactions and all relationships, including romantic relationships, throughout your life, unless you become aware of them.
Right. So there's this attachment theory, attachment style stuff is affecting every relationship in our life, or just our romantic relationships?
Yeah, even social interact, just how you interact, with yourself, but also with others. The reason why it comes up a lot in romantic relationships and why I decided to focus on this is because it's a part that feels very raw and very vulnerable, and also resembles a lot of the relationship with our parents. This is why a lot of people feel really triggered, even though the relationship is healthy and it's a good person we've met, because actually it's not always you're metaphorically in front of your partner, you're kind of in front of your dad or your mum when you were 4 or 8 or whatever.
And this is a good point, because there's a wonderful book that I am a big fan of called Get the Love You Want by the wonderful couple, the Hendrixes. And it really talks about how we actually unconsciously look for a partner who has the positive and negative traits of our parents.
Yeah.
And it's something that I've seen for myself personally. I've seen in other people. We like to often people don't want to believe that is the case, but it's definitely something that we are attracted towards because it's familiar, right? It's familiar, and it's why people end up remaking the relationships that our parents have had, because it's familiar. It's what we know. It's what we're kind of just like programmed into from a young age, that this is how love is. This is what love feels like.
Yes. And I mean, to be honest, that's something that's come up in our relationship as well. Like you were saying, I'm not your dad, and I have to say, I'm not your mom. Not often, but sometimes it comes through with all the love and playfulness.
Playfulness is a very important part of our relationship, because things would be so dry and boring without it. It would be. And I see a lot of dry and boring relationships that come across because everyone's trying to be serious and say the right thing. But I've given up on that a long time ago. So I like to whiz over actually what the avoidant attachment style looks like, what the anxious attachment style looks like as well, and how some of the traits and stuff manifest, because I think that'd be good for some people, because some people might be listening to this and be like, oh, I'm not sure where I fit in. So maybe we kick off with the anxious. Our resident expert there.
So anxious attachment style is often related to a really deep abandonment wound. And this stems from when our parents was really inconsistent with us. So on one hand, they might have been really loving, and when you're sad, they pick you up and they love you. And then another time is real contrast. They might be really dismissive, or they might be really cold. Other times they might be very accepting of your needs that you are expressing. And again, other times they're very, dismissive, or just not acknowledging you, or just leaving you to your own devices. So this creates a real anxiety of inconsistency. We don't know how our needs are going to be met moving forward.
Got it. That's what it is. So there's an anxiety about our needs being met.
Yes.
And I guess on the avoidance side, the way I see it, is there's this kind of attempt to meet all our own needs and not really allow other people to meet our own needs, for kind of distrust of other people and their ability to meet those needs, but also for fiercely keeping one's independence and safety, and also a fear of closeness, that can be living underneath that, a fear of loss of freedom and so forth. So this kind of drives our avoidant behavior. Is there anything else I've missed out there?
No, I think that covers it. Yeah, hyper independence.
Hyper independence. So what does it look like in someone who, what does the anxious attachment style look like in somebody?
So it's...
What are some of the traits and characteristics of that?
So some of the traits of someone that is anxious attached is they often worry They often overthink. They often have low self-esteem, yet they think everyone is wonderful. So is this what I talk about a lot, that we put others on a pedestal? Or is like, of course they can have the thing because they're freaking amazing and I'm shit, basically. And also when you're anxious, you become hyper aware of your partner and your relationship. So you're constantly looking for cues that something is off. You often wonder and are very scared. So this is like, and you know, you feel it in your heart, you feel it in your body that something is off or is going to go really, really horribly wrong. So it creates this, again, that, you know, the state of feeling really, really anxious in your body. In dating, for example, something that I see is we connected with someone and they sent a message and now they haven't answered, and I'm talking hours, I'm talking, you know, a day, and again they just become hyper alert and start to wonder all the things they did wrong and all the things that's gonna go wrong and all the reasons why love cannot happen for them.
Yeah, and that can be received as someone who is being bit needy.
Yeah, they can often come across as quite needy. And yeah, what's the other word? Oh, it's just it's not my first language. But yeah, very clingy. Yeah.
Clingy.
And something that's quite with anxious as well, because their self-esteem and self-worth is quite low anyway. So if it would be some criticism or feedback, they have a really strong reaction to it because they just collapse into thinking, here is everything. Here is when everything is going to go wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at the extreme ends, there's just a lot of overthinking and being in the story, right? So like I'm kind of talking about this from the other side of being a person who is interacting with someone who is anxious, right? For those of you that maybe don't resonate with that, maybe you've received it on the other end, is like someone who is kind of worried about the relationship and always like checking in the state of the relationship. You know, it could be things like you have text, you know, you haven't texted them back for 2-3 days and they've already texted you 2 or 3 times to be like, hey, is everything okay? Have I done something? I'm really sorry. Like blah, 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 blah. Because they're in their story that everything's falling apart and love is leaving them and it's running away and they're in fear. Whereas you're just chilling because, like, you know, you're out with some friends or you've been to a party and you're really hungover, or you just don't fancy using your phone for a couple of days, you know, and you can feel like this person is like just kind of kind of grabbing at you, you know, wanting your energy, wanting to, you know, be connected, be close. And it can feel like that often in the very early stages as well, right? Where it's like falling in love with the dream of the person and the relationship before you've really got to know the person and the relationship's really developed.
Yeah. And I think, you know, this is another reason why when I started doing inner work a few years in, I remember my sister said to me that, because, you know, she's married with kids, with a house, with the cars, with the pool, with the life, you know. And she said to me, also, you need to, because we're from the same family, we're sisters, even though we have different, some of the wounding is very similar. So she said to me, my advice for you is to really go deeper in this inner work journey, because it doesn't matter if you get engaged, if you get married, if you have kids, if your core of your being still feels wounded. We don't speak in this, but just for the sake of this podcast, you'll never feel secure. So you can only feel secure when you feel secure in yourself. And I love my sister for many, many reasons, and forever grateful for that insight, because she's a big mirror of me and vice versa.
That's a powerful insight, because and maybe it will never go away, you know. It will, no. If you don't do anything about it,
it doesn't naturally go away. You can heal and you can grow and you can overcome it, but it does require work.
Effort.
Yes.
Yeah, it requires effort and work and love, and consistency and communication, things we'll talk about in a bit. So from the avoidant side, what does the avoidant attachment look like in somebody? And I just did an episode about this, so I've just hoofed over the list, right? one of the things I see in a lot of my clients, and this is the ones that are dating, is that they feel like the women they like never like them. It's something I keep hearing from avoidant men. The women that they like don't like them. There's an avoidance of expressing any emotions and feelings, worries or wounds in a relationship. There's a fear around that being used against them. Definitely a thrill of the chase, enjoying the thrill of the chase of a relationship and a woman, but avoiding of the depth, right? They want to avoid conflict. They want to avoid any emotion and feeling being expressed to them or being expressed by them. Often the avoidant men, well, I'll start with men, not just men avoidant women, but the men that I work with, is like they don't know how to feel their feelings and express them. They're just often can be quite logical in their own logical way, which isn't necessarily kind of logic. An avoidance of vulnerability and sharing and anything kind of uncomfortable about their personal lives. It's very, very typical. One of the most common ones is the avoidance of commitment, not wanting to commit, always wanting to keep things open and be able to basically be free. That's the thing. There's often an avoidance of taking on any responsibility as well for the state of the relationship. Lack of empathy, which comes with not being able to feel their own feelings, a lack of empathy for their partners or the women they date. So they don't understand, like, why is she having this big emotional reaction? What's wrong with her? She must be crazy. That's often something I've heard from a lot of men. Can take a long time to actually really like someone, especially when you're deep in your avoidance. It's like because you're not used to being in your feelings and emotions, it can take a really long time for you to realize that you're actually kind of liking someone. Very critical of the women they date. Fault finding as well. This is another trait that I'm seeing a lot with the men that I work with, is that they see a lot of faults, and those faults aren't usually necessarily communicated. They just rattle around their minds a lot, like thinking of all the things they don't like or hyper focusing on some of the things they don't like. There's a tendency to looking for better. This kind of idea that there's this cyborg woman who is a combination of all the best traits and all the women that they've met put together. That woman is out there somewhere in the world, and if they just look long enough and hard enough, they're going to find her. Spoiler alert, it's fucking not true. I've met men in their 50s who I've worked with who have been searching for this woman and very long time and become very unhappy because they keep looking, they keep thinking there's something better. Also, there's a fear of having other people be dependent on them. And also prioritizing. God, I can't speak today. It's just like happened a few times today. Prioritizing themselves over everything else and other people, especially.
Yeah, and this is something that I see in clients, female, who are avoidant. That, but you mentioned that the men express that the women they are into are not into them. And when I see women with an avoidant in my practice, that the woman has a real yearning for the man to pursue them and to lead and to show them the affection and the love, because the woman feels so much love and carrying attention for them. But because she's avoidant, she is, as you mentioned, she doesn't express herself. She's not in contact with her emotions. She feels very scared to have the commitment. Therefore, the feedback that the women often get is that the men is like, oh, I didn't know you were into it. I didn't think you had a good time on the date. I didn't think you really wanted me to pursue you. So it's just creating this, catch-22, like really wanting it and really yearning for it. Yet the signals that you're sending over is like, I don't fucking care. But actually they really do, because they're so worried about how they're gonna come across, fling to the to the anxious. And something I see as well, it can be very early in a dating journey that a man might text, right, really looking forward to meeting you tomorrow. I hope you find me attractive, flirt smiley. And the woman goes like, oh, well, he has got no way to self-validate himself. He clearly hasn't got a support system. Again, we talked about story that, and this is why we're here as coaches, to be like, well, like, how do you know? You created all this story. You might ask him, but also is date one. You don't have to ask on date one, what's your support system for internal and external validation? That's just creating from fear. But yeah, it's very interesting how early it can manifest. And then I find some people, they're quite cool and they do everything quote unquote right and they like chill and whatever happens, I'm going to trust the unfolding. And then when they actually become a couple or they have moved in, that's when things starts to feel more serious and that the stakes are higher. And this is where they start. So they almost get a little bit shocked, like, oh, what's happened? Is something wrong? Now I feel X, Y, Z, and I was actually quite chill in the beginning. It must be something wrong with me. Or if you're more avoidant, there must be something wrong with the person. Again, it's just your own perception and your story. Nothing had changed.
Yeah. And there was something in there you said, a fear of rejection as well. I see with avoidant men a lot is like there's a deep fear of rejection. So they always play things super cool, so it never looks like they're actually making an effort or trying. And they're unable to often communicate how they feel, what they need and what they want as well. I think that we've got to put that in there as well. When I mentioned that, it's like this inability to really express needs and wants because they're so used to fulfilling their own needs and don't really trust other people to fulfill their needs. They've never spent much time kind of getting to know their own needs. So yeah, you can imagine that when those two types of people, the anxious person, the avoidant, comes together, there's a real push-pull that occurs. And I imagine a lot of you listeners are listening to this and going, yeah, I've seen that. And that's obviously because the avoidant, as a stereotype, and, also correct me if this doesn't sound like what you've seen with your clients, is like the avoidant person meets the anxious person. If the avoidant person it can cool enough, they'll stay cool, maybe they'll swap details. And then the avoidant person starts to chase because they're starting to fall in love with the idea of the person and, picking up on the breadcrumbs that they enjoy. The avoidant person feeds back and gives back and is like, yeah, cool, here's my energy. And then maybe the avoidant person suddenly realizes it's a bit too much and they pull away, right? And they're like, oh, I want some space, or I don't fancy replying, or whatever, right? After a date, they don't necessarily say that they had a really good time because they're avoidant. They can't express how they feel, or they're playing it super cool. And then the anxious person fills the gap. They move towards, right? And then if that's too much for the avoidant person, they move away again. And maybe the anxious person realizes they've moved away and then they take a step back. The avoidant person's like, oh, they've moved away. Okay, cool. I'm going to choose to fill some of that space, and they come towards. And this dance can happen indefinitely throughout people's whole relationships, right? We've seen this in deep into people's relationships. How do you...
And you mentioned the fear of rejection as well. And this is something that I see that in the women that I coach, that when you're fearful of rejection, you do often fantasize, because in the fantasy, you can't be rejected. In your fantasy, what you want can still happen. So you refuse consciously or unconsciously to come into reality, to come into the truth of what is actually happening. So it can also create that dynamic of, as you said, falling in love with someone's potential, or just not really being rooted in what is this connection versus what your thoughts and feelings might have been. Because, no one can reject you in your fantasy, as it were.
And that's with the anxious women, you're saying?
That can be with anxious and avoidant. I tend to find it a little bit more in avoidant women.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, maybe that's independent, I'd say, as the avoidant men I've worked with, and myself, actually, I say personally, I don't really fall in love with the future. That's probably a trait of mine. I don't like future pace in my mind things. And I'm just thinking to a few of the anxious clients I've had. A number of them, I noticed they do have a tendency to start to fall in love with the future. Like, oh my God, all the wonderful things we can do. And you can talk to them about it. And they're like, oh yeah, I thought about this. And, oh my God, I've met this person. And oh my God, I think they're the one. And they met 2 weeks ago. And that's definitely been my experience of working with people. But I think the question would be good for the listeners and us actually is, how have we seen these traits as avoidant and anxious show up in our own relationship?
Yeah.
That question wasn't on the list.
No, I'm just thinking of all the examples I've had. No, I'm joking. So what a dynamic, you touched upon it, is this push and pull, or this like dance of, so for example, it could be that we have, from my perspective, if we have created a really beautiful weekend, or we've been on holiday together, so we've been together for a longer period of time and it's been beautiful and it's been really magical. In the beginning of our relationship, when we came back from that weekend, or we came back from a holiday and you expressed that you wanted some time alone, that could trigger me into thinking, oh, this contrast that would have resembled how I felt that my parents were with me in childhood is either like on or off. But the more I learned about you, and the more I learned about the avoidant, is like, it doesn't, well, which is like 99.9% of the time, it's not about you, but it's like they need almost like a break from the break, because now they need to fill up their cup with some alone time. But again, like, so that's one thing. And I think in the beginning, especially as well, when you expressed your need to go away on your own, I had no healthy experiences of a happy couple that spend time on their own. So when you said that, I remember I was feeling really, really triggered in terms of, again, my anxious tendency going in like, something is wrong, I'm too much, this, that, and the other, to then relearn that actually, again, is not about me, and it's more you asking for what it is that you need. So I think it's like that, coming back to that push-pull, where it's like it's either on or off type thing. So I think something we've worked at, in the last few years is like leveling out in terms of like consistency and what we both need, and creating a relationship that work for both of us, from needs and not story.
Yeah. No, I think back to when we were in lockdown. I think there's somewhere I remember being like, okay, like I need some time of my own. And it was like, I remember there was a reaction afterwards. And and you were like, what's wrong? And I was like, nothing's wrong. I just like being on my own. Like being on my own for me is really fucking cool. I love it. I can spend a lot of time. I lived on my own for a lot of most of my adult life. I've lived alone. So it's almost, for me, being in a relationship and being close to someone day in, day out, it actually becomes quite exhausting for me, because I'm having to think of your feelings and emotions constantly. And that for me can sometimes just be like, I just want to think about me. I just want to think about, what do I want to do in this moment, instead of like, what are we going to do? And for me, that can be really like, that's quite soothing for me to just be like, I'm going to, now we live in Madeira. We're currently living in Madeira. That might look like me just going to the beach for the day, or it might be me sitting in the front room on my own watching TV. It's not as, or still going away, right? I still go on plenty. This year's been probably an extreme year, but like going on retreats and so forth that I've been on like quite regularly, especially this year, men's retreats and so forth. And then later on to a silent retreat as well. So it does show up. And I think maybe you reflect back is like one of the ways in which I've had to learn is like your being with your emotions and your emotional expression. Because I think what can happen, has definitely happened in the past, is I hear your feelings as criticism. Like, as I've done something wrong. I fucked up. I've done something wrong. I'm useless, like kind of thing, right? And I think I don't think that's unique to me, because we've also seen that in the clients that we've worked with as well. And learning to be with those emotions, just listen, be present. I remember definitely in lockdown in my flat in East London, like learning some techniques to just kind of just sit and hear it all, right? And I guess maybe it's worth noting in the first year or so of our relationship, there was a lot of emotion whirling around. We were in the middle of a pandemic, so, there was some intense times as well in there. But it did affect our relationship in that, you could catastrophize things sometimes as well. Like, I had a habit of shutting down. I still am not completely outside of that habit, right? But these are the things that are quite common within anxious, kind of avoidant relationships and how they manifest?
Yeah, and I remember, I think maybe like the first few dates, I think you talked about your dating experiences with other women and other relationships, and you're like, it comes to 4 months and then I just don't know what women expect of me. And I was like, it's like either he just said this or like it's a unconscious, just spitting lyrics as it were. But I was like, as an anxious, I was like, what do I do with this information? Which is something that I ask often of David. When you share things, what does that mean? When most of the time it's just you sharing something. So it's like that for, that dynamic, that knowing that one of your fears is how much will my needs and my emotions and my life basically trap you in some way, or minimize your freedom. And it's again when you go into your man cave periods, that is again it's not about me. I remember that was very hard in the beginning, but again we talked about it, like you need alone time and you need space, and I need to just have that reassurance that I haven't done anything wrong and nothing is wrong. And obviously if something would be wrong and it's something that has happened, we consciously spoke about that too.
And I think it's worth touching on reassurance, because I think that's definitely in my past relationships when my partners have wanted reassurance, I've kind of been like, oh, what the fuck do you need reassurance for? I'm with you. Like, what else do you need? I'm quite, what's the word? Not ambivalent, but almost hostile to the idea of reassurance, right? Because I guess reassurance is also expressing emotion and feeling. And I guess in our relationship, that's probably been a big shift for me, is like being able to be like, oh, that's something you need. Okay. I don't want to give it to you. It's like, that's not my ideal communication style, but if that's important to you, you need that. I don't lose anything. It's not hurtful to me and it's beneficial to you, then yeah, I can do that. Yeah. Because I can see that with some of the clients that we've worked with, that reassurance piece being like, no, I don't want to reassure her. Like, why do I need to say, I told her I loved her last week. Why does she need to hear it every day? Why do I need to tell her that I want to be with her? Like, I told her that last week, like all that stuff, right? That's something I commonly see. And I'm using, I'm always painting the man as being avoidant, not because all men are avoidant, but because that's my experience. And it's just easier for me to talk from he to she. But yeah, I think that reassurance piece for a lot of couples is a problem, right? They struggle with that. The avoidant partner struggles to do that, because it's almost like, I know for me, in the past, I struggled with it because I felt like if there's some part of me was like, am I giving false promises? Like, oh, I'm always going to love you. I'm always going to want to be with you. Because there's also that part of my mind that knows that like everything is finite and everything's going to end. Yeah. So by saying these things, am I lying? That's definitely something that's been through my mind. Not so much now, but definitely in the past.
Yeah, and I think, on the need, the reason why I wouldn't have communicated that early in our relationship or in other relationship is because I was, this wounding of the feminine, of too muchness. So I was like, I'm an easy breezy, highly independent woman, I don't fucking need to be looked after by a man. I don't need anything from this person. Who am I if I have emotional needs? Oh my God, that means I need to open. I need to actually know what I'm feeling, which was something I avoided for over 30 years. And then admit that I have needs, which was also something I didn't want to do for a really long time. And then communicating them with the risk that wouldn't get met. So as you mentioned, like as we're talking about, it's very important to, with all dynamics, but especially with anxious and avoidant, because you see the same situation so vastly different, to really learn like, what are my needs? What do I need? And how can I consciously communicate that and make it super easy for my partner to give me what I need, and vice versa. And of course, always checking in. If I have XYZ need, where is David willing to meet me? And if you're not willing to meet me, well, do I have a support system around, coaches, therapy, and all these things. So yeah, very important to learn. And, your needs are not too much. Even if your needs can't be met, it doesn't mean that is something wrong with you or you're too much. is coming into the relationship where you're both willing to meet each other.
Yeah. And I think when we're on this topic of needs, as an avoidant person, I actually find it quite hard to pinpoint what they are. I feel like I had very few needs. My needs are usually things that I can meet for myself, or I will just take myself. Like, I don't really have a need for words of affirmation or reassurance. Like, I think I've warmed to it over the years and during our relationship. Like, it feels more meaningful. But it's one of those double-edged swords with me, is that, like, definitely in my childhood, especially from my dad, there was a desire to be seen and be acknowledged. But because that never happened, I just distanced myself from the need to have that happen. So now I've really moved through that over the last few years. Especially, there's 2 instances of really being seen by older men who I look up to. Like, that's been two meaningful instances in my life. It's happened in the last couple of years, actually, 2 or 3 years. So in relationship, I've been able to, like, take, instead of batting away, and I do that sometimes, right? The compliments or the reassurance and the love. Sometimes I bat it away and go, oh yeah, but there is this, I have softened to it and it feels more meaningful to me. But a lot of my needs, I think, are like needs for alone time, space, not to be pressed to express what I'm feeling when I don't feel either safe or that it's the appropriate time to do so. And a lot of my needs are like things that I can take care of. And I think that's maybe synonymous of the avoidant person's life, because whatever's occurred, they've had to be independent to kind of move through the world and feel safe. And the best way that they've found to get love is in many ways to give the love to themselves that they want in many ways.
And something that I see with avoidant attached women that I coach is like the smallest inconvenience. Fuck this shit. I don't need this.
Yeah.
You know, but why? Because I can do, because they're hyper independent, so it can be that thing to be like, so often the coaching for me would then to be like, grounding, what was it that occurred? Did it recur? Or, is it your perception? And just bring it into, like, obviously you have I'm not going to tell you to stay in something that you don't want to be in. Equally, you shouldn't come from a place of like, this is your wounding or your fear, or, coming from a place of some form of dysfunctional pattern that is running, because it's not a conscious decision and you most likely will regret it afterwards, so just bring them into a place. But it's often this like, fuck this shit. Why? I don't need this.
Yeah.
What was it that we used to say? This bungle. I don't need this bungle. Fuck this bungle. I don't need this bungle. So that can be something where it's like the anxious attached may feel like, oh, I've done something wrong. I need to change and I need to do better. So it's like when you're in conflict, the avoidant can be like, fuck this bungle. I'm, going to sit in my room. And the anxious want to reconnect. And it's like literally becomes this, the image that came into my mind is like the Tom and Jerry.
I thought
it's a little bit like that. So, and it's again, you mentioned that. So one of your needs is not to be pressured into sharing how you feel when you're not ready. And that's something I've really had to learn, because as an anxious attached, if you go into silence and I am sitting in my fear and you're not saying anything, well, that is doubling down on my anxiety. But if which I will never do again, I've learned the hard way, when I pressed you, then all your thoughts and feelings came through highly unfiltered. And then that was like, I think you said to me, did this help you? In a very loving way. Do you feel better? And I was like, no, I'm never going to do this again. So sometimes you learn. Most of the time, hopefully you always learn. But it's a lot of learning first, like, but that was fostered in what do I need in order to, because what you kind of want to do is you want to bring yourself, or you're desperately trying to bring yourself back to safety, that nothing is going to go wrong. That might mirror something that happened in the past, is just that feeling of rejection or that feeling of abandonment, especially with someone you love dearly. It became this like Tom and Jerry spin around. Hence why grounding is very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an important piece, is like the chasing and wanting your partner to express how they feel and pressuring them, pushing them to do so, insisting that you hear the feeling, so that it's, when I say the anxious person wants to know what's happening. They want to know, and they want to know now, so their fears can be alleviated. And there's times where we've seen this in other couples. It's like, there's also something that we've also seen in couples and our relationship, I imagine as well. It's like the anxious person's like, I want to know. And the avoidant person is very straight, very honest about the thoughts and feelings, and it overloads the anxious person.
Yeah.
Hearing all of it overloads them, and they're like, oh shit, I wanted to know, but that's too much for me. So I can't hold all this. And that's also left the avoidant person feeling like, oh, well, now I've expressed my emotions, the thing that I'm afraid to do, I now feel rejected because you can't be with the emotions and hear them, and you're vacating, and that creates another layer of problem in the relationship.
Yeah, it becomes really messy, and anxious attached people are notoriously challenged around uncertainty. I saw this reel the other day, which made me laugh. I mean, I do class myself as a 10 out of 10, just to add some layer on this story. And it said she's a 10 out of 10, but rewatches the same show over and over and over again for the last 5 years. And I was like, that's so me. So for example, like as I'm an entrepreneur and business owner, so I sit with a lot of risk, I sit with a lot of uncertainty, as it is. So I am much better at holding it. But I tell you, I've been watching Modern Family is my go-to. It's like my third family. I watch it on repeat every night when we go into bed. So as I fall asleep, I just have that, because it's like it just creates this familiarity for me. So I do have these things even as a high achieving businesswoman, as we often joke about at home. Is like I literally sometimes walk around with a blanket. I fucking love my blanket. It's like it makes me feel familiar. And it's not this blanket that the kids had when I was a nanny, but it's like it's a full on
Where's the blanket?
It's a full on blanket that I can, as adults will have, you can wrap yourself around. But it's like there are some things, and as I often joke about as well, David knows when I'm really sitting with uncertainty and my spiritual bypassing is doing a lot of washing. I do a lot of washing. Everything is washed in this house. There is washing everywhere, because that's the only thing I can control, And I know there's 1.5 hours, then I'm going to hang the washing XYZ. But, we digress. But it's really around the notoriously bad with uncertainty. So if there is something that's come up in the relationship, or there is some disagreements or arguments, and the avoidant need the time, and the anxious need the actual time together and not away, that can just create. So it's like finding, I have many practices to make myself feel certain, but we must also laugh about these things, because bloody hell, it gets so serious about wounding in childhood, this and childhood that, you can be highly functioning, highly successful, and you can have these wounds and you can heal. And sometimes it's really, really hard, but it's also very, very healing and very, very beautiful. Just get a blanket, Modern Family, and you're fucking set.
Yeah. And I guess in many ways, the opposite is I can be really good with uncertainty, relationship uncertainty. Like, I'm just like cool and calm, relaxed and chill. And me, I also like variety, right? That's also a part of who I am. I think if you haven't listened to our podcast before, we started out our relationship in an open relationship. And that really suits me, as a person, because variety, uncertainty, unknown, all those things are like, oh, that's fun and exciting. But for someone who's anxious, that kind of goes against a lot of what you want to experience in a relationship. So it's the very different ways, and you can laugh at it, because it's the levels of variety I'll go for is like food. Like, I don't eat the same thing. Funny enough, I don't mind eating. It's funny actually, isn't it? Because there's some, you will eat the same thing again and again and again and get sick of it. Whereas I don't really care so much. Yeah. But I'll find variety in all sorts of things in my life. Like, my wardrobe's massive. I wear different clothes all the time. I feel like I wear this shirt all the time when I'm podcasting, but it's because, I like the shirt, but it's also thin and it's really hot here right now. But yeah, so you see there's also humor in it, like by the way it comes out, like even the way that I think we go to the supermarket. Also, we'll go to the supermarket and she wants to go down the aisles to get the stuff that's on the list. I want to go down every aisle and just look and just have a look what's there and pick up stuff and stuff like that. But that's also because, I like to take my time as well with things.
Yeah.
But we do digress a little bit. I think it's good to talk about maybe some of the like obvious issues we see in ourselves, but also in our clients who are kind of in this anxious avoidant trap. Like, what are some of the obvious things that you've seen with our clients and ourselves?
I think
issues and challenges.
Something that I see in couples that we have coached is a constant disagreement and argument without solution. They trigger each other to a point that they don't know what they started to talk about. And there is like no red thread in terms of like, okay, now we're bringing this very like unconscious, instead of going, okay, we're bringing this is the intention and what is the actions, what are we taking away from that? And that, of course, is frustrating for both parts because the couples that we coach, they love each other dearly. They love each other. They want to stay together. So of course, for two people who really love each other and they constantly argue and fight, and even though they have the best intention, again, something happens and they feel really, really triggered. And then they come back into like, I'm not heard, I'm not seen. And it's just this constant kind of emotional roller coaster, but also this, it never ends and it gets tiring. Something that I see as well in couples is that, maybe that would be the avoidant then from what you're sharing, is that they're highly critical of that partner. So if they're highly critical of the partner, and that would be the avoidant, and the anxious would have, to begin with, really low self-esteem, they feel really down about themselves, and they kind of struggle to rebuild the confidence of, it's like, well, my worth is intact no matter what my partner says and feels. I'm just going to create space to listen. But that is something that's really, really like grinding connection down so much from being that hyper critical, and they want the partner to lead, and then they lead and they're not fucking leading the right way, and they want them to shower them with love, and then they shower them with love and it's not the right way, and it's like, well, what's gonna give? We need to work together to create a different outcome.
Yeah, there's definitely things I've seen. The couples we've worked with, like arguments, like you said, arguments with no solutions. I'll add in something in there is like trying to be right, focusing on who's right is something we see with a lot of they're getting in the nitty gritty of like, that didn't happen, I didn't say that. And I imagine that's with a lot of couples, but particularly we see that a lot. And arguing over the thing they were arguing over, and then become arguing over like who said what and how they said that thing, and that becoming a really destructive kind of way of being.
No,
you're just breathing.
Yeah. If you're not finished, then please continue.
No, I'm not finished. There's definitely issues around not expressing needs, right? That's something we definitely see, like not expressing what they need and what they want in any kind of clear way. There's the kind of shutting down and chasing, or the shutting down and being the other person being frustrated, the other person shut down. That's definitely a dynamic you see a lot. I said trying to be right. You said being really hypercritical as well. And then all these things lead to a lack of intimacy, in particular, lack of sexual intimacy. Oh no, the thing I wanted to say before that is feeling like they're not allowed to express authentic self. This is more of a belief that manifests inside a relationship and a feeling, but there's definitely something we've seen in a number of couples. Like, I'm not allowed to be me. They won't accept me as me being me. There's definitely a strong story there.
Yeah. used this picture in a masterclass I ran the other week, and it's basically, I'm just going to try to explain this so people can get a good picture. Basically, I want you to imagine it's like two statues of a man and a woman, and they're sitting back to back. And these statues are hollow, and inside you see two little people, which resembles their inner children facing each other. And is basically with the caption of, "This is really what love is." You know, it's the adults facing away from each other, but it's the inner children facing towards each other. It's the inner child that's kind of taking the lead in an adult, romantic relationship. And I feel this picture just really spoke to me, to just also, we can get really bogged down in, attachment styles, and you're this and your preference is that, and your mom this and my father this, and rah. When actually it's again to just like humanize everything and really bring in compassion and love, that when your partner, of course, there shouldn't be anything, aggressive or toxic or, hurtful, just assuming we're in a healthy, relationship, that when our partner acts out, as I said earlier, it's not about you, and it's trying to just, of course, do your practices so you can be grounded and hear your person, just add that lens of a little bit what you were saying with yourself earlier, that much of how you show up is because of your relationship with your father. So when you act out in a certain way, I can see David Chambers, my partner, and I can also see the little boy within who is crying out to be accepted and to be loved. And of course, the same with me. So yeah, bringing in compassion for your partner to, again, just communicate in a human-led way, and just like, what is it that you need from me? How can I help you? How can I support you? And obviously for this to be vice versa, so we not become codependent. And I think it's a very, just a beautiful lens to connect with your partner from.
Yeah. And I guess you're straying into my next question is like, how do we, and I might answer this first actually, it's like, how do we start to heal within inside the relationship from this trap, this anxious avoidant trap? Right. And I think you started there by saying about the inner children, for instance, right? How important that is to kind of acknowledge that. There's open communication. I'm just going to reel off some of these first. Open communication, self-soothing, getting in contact with our emotions and expressing what we're feeling, acknowledging each other's points, worldview and emotions is super important. Asking for what we actually need, knowing what our needs are and expressing them. Being present to now and not the story in our minds or our fears from the past or our fears of the future is also a really important one, I see.
Yeah, very much. And something that I talk about a lot in my practice is that the women that I coach, but it's also a form of mentoring, a form of teaching. I call them emotional ninja warrioresses. Something that's very, very important is that you have the emotional capacity to hold. Your partner is saying something, you feel triggered as fuck. Now you're thinking that it's your dad that speaks to you. You want a different outcome. That's not going to happen today. And what I also call the women that I work with is like, well, women overall. I'm not saying men isn't that. I'm just speaking about my practice, which is focused on women. That we're multi-dimensional women who can hold a lot. And emotional resilience is such an important part, why we both speak a lot about grounding practices. But I think you mentioned in there as well, to express one's emotion. It doesn't have to always be that your partner is going to be the audience for that. Like emotional release techniques, so fucking important. If you're angry, it's your responsibility to have this in a healthy outlet away from your partner. You need to say, I need time out. I'm going to go away and then, take a pillow, throw it on the floor, like scream into a pillow if you feel like, and it's all these practices as well, because sometimes you can think your way into a different state, but not all the time. And if you have a really strong emotion, you need to find an outlet for that. which is why I'm such a big fan of emotional release techniques. So you can choose different. Otherwise, you're just in this Tom and Jerry rat race.
Yeah. The emotional release is an important one, that emotional expression, because sometimes with words of our partner, that will be perfect to express our emotions. And that might be frustration. You might want to sit down and talk about it. But also sometimes it's just not the place to go. Your relationship is to take those emotions elsewhere. Like, I run my men's program, and the number of times the men have come into the program, who are in the program, bring their stuff that's happening in their relationship and express it here with the other men and be heard and be listened to and be seen. And it makes such a difference because they don't need to bring it to their partner. They can bring the result of that expression, like what's left over, like, oh, love, compassion, or maybe there's a conversation to have. And it's where we have to be mindful of not being kind of codependent, always looking for our partner for us to release our emotions. But also there's the other side of emotional expression, especially I see for avoidant men being difficult, which is expressing love, right? Is learning to express love in the relationship, express that appreciation through touch, through words, or whatever the love language is. And I'm a big fan these days. I keep saying this to people. It's like, I don't think it's about just learning your partner's love language and only giving them love in that way. I think it's about range.
Yes.
Like learning to express love across the board in different ways within your relationship, because I believe that there's a nourishment for us all. I don't think either of us, our love language is gifts, for instance, right? I'm pretty sure we're not really fussed about gifts, but like I will buy a gift from time to time.
So good at gift giving. I think if anything, I've developed a love language of gifts in this relationship.
Because I'm good at giving gifts. But giving gifts, for instance, is not my love language, but it's something I've tried to consciously do more of, because it's like, it is another way to express love, because we can get tired of the same old ways. I think, but that general emotional expression becomes really, really important. But the understanding each other's world points of view is the one I wanted to talk on a bit more, because like, I know we've seen, and this is kind of part of communication, but we'll touch on this world view piece, is like when we start to see our partner's world, we stop being an adversary to them. Like what we see a lot with the arguments is they're two people who are basically trying to win the argument. They think they're adversaries. They're trying to go against each other. But when we step into trying to understand our partner's point of view, that might be understanding their story, that might be understanding their fears, that might be understanding their worries and anxieties or their trauma, we develop more compassion for them and their reactions and what's going on for them, which means we develop more connection instead of trying to win, which is ultimately, I say this, I don't know if it's something I read or something I've come up with myself, but it's like when we bring the patriarchy into our relationship. The whole patriarchy thing is about winning. Ultimately, it's about winning, right? That's the core of it, like winning at all costs. But when we bring that idea into our relationship gets severely damaged, because winning is not what the ultimate goal here. Connection is the ultimate goal.
Yeah. And also just finishing on a point around, communicating needs and asking yourself, is this need a genuine need, or is this fear-based? That sounds like a very similar thing, but I'll tell you now, this is gonna radically change your relationship and how you create in this life. Because when we ask for needs to be met simply because of fear, you come from a place of lack. So even when you do receive it, you don't believe it. It's all from a creation of not thinking you can have it. Versus, and this is obviously what inner work is a lot about as well, to just peeling away the layer of what is my authentic true self versus conditioning versus my parents versus media versus influences versus social media, whatever. And what is me, and again, like adding that other layer of, is this a true need that I have, or am I trying to control my partner consciously or unconsciously to just, and I'm not asking you to have a go at yourself or criticize yourself in any ways, to have a very, radically honest conversation with self. And just, if it is from fear, instead of asking the person, please don't do that because I have a fear of X, is to just switch it slightly and just ask your partner what you need to feel safe. the whole dynamic will radically change. This is what I see as a big shift for people, as creating from a place of lack and become really abundant in the relationship, but also in their life.
And this kind of fear piece is interesting, because I've mentioned it before in, I think, workshops. Is like we often create boundaries and needs to avoid our own wounding or trauma or fears, instead of, say, working on them. Yeah. Right. This is very topical to the moment. We've got Jonah Hill. His text message has been leaked, and it's like I feel he's aiming to do is he's trying to create boundaries around his insecurities, fears, and wounding, so he doesn't have to deal with them. He doesn't have to work through them, right? And I see this a lot in people's relationship. It's like, I'm afraid of this thing, and instead of me working on it, I'm just going to say no. I'm putting up a hard boundary, and I'm not willing to go near there or talk about this thing, instead of going away and kind of doing the work on kind of looking at that.
Yeah. You mentioned the word, I know we need to finish up just very quickly. You mentioned the word willing, which, as a former matchmaker, current coach, who's been in this industry for a long time, the most attractive trait is to meet someone who is willing to grow. You will not find the finalized product. They do not exist. There will always, even if someone has been 10 years of inner work and 1,500 years of that, such a pet peeve when people say, oh, I've done 100 years of work, so I don't need to face this. Yes, you do. If you're still triggered, that's your benchmark, So something that's very important, I find time and time again, is to meet someone who is willing. Of course, there is compatibility. You kind of are into the same things. You kind of want the same things in the future. You're kind of looking at getting that the same way. And then again, the willingness, and something that David and I very much have experienced in our, for only 4 years together, I'm a completely different woman to who I was 4 years ago. I've radically changed so much, even in this year. Who I was 6 months ago versus who I am now is a different version. And it's the reality of a quote that I read many years ago. This husband to a wife said, like, I'm very fortunate. We've been married for, 300 years, and I've had the fortune to meet all the versions of my wife. And I was like, oh, how cute. Yeah, cute, but also hard as fuck in a relationship, because you like, and I think you've had a lot of that, like, okay, well, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to keep up. And I'm not doing it from a point of wanting to make you feel bad or not keeping up or anything. It's just me growing as a woman, So again, meeting someone that is willing to grow, I fundamentally believe is like the most important trait, because life happens, change happens, growth happens, beautiful things happen, challenging things happen, all of these things.
Yeah. And I just say that, the willingness to grow together is incredibly important, as you said there. And I think it'd be amiss if I didn't touch on, before we finish up in a moment, is like, what people you're going to find is that when you start to become more, say, secure in how you relate, there will be less excitement and there'll be less drama than you're used to. And there'll be less anxiety for you as well, right? And that might feel boring for you. It's a very normal thing I've seen with a lot of men that I've worked with. They're like, oh yeah, like I went out on a date, it was nice, they were cool. And they're like, yeah, but there wasn't much spark there. And I'm like, okay, I go through it and go, okay, the values match, the person's on your wavelength, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh, okay, I see. Like, because you're used to this drama and anxiety and this chase and this thrill, this very mature care that could grow into love doesn't feel that exciting. And I think that's definitely something we see with the kind of anxious avoidant trap, is that over time, it just becomes, it could literally feel quite mundane and boring and routine. But because that's how relationships are a lot of the time, there's a lot of routine in our relationship, waking up, going to work, making food. Like, it's not that exciting. Like, you can make it exciting. You can take the joy and the love and the fun moments, but the overallness of it doesn't seem that like wonderfully exciting. But if you've got drama and worry and fear and anxiety in your relationship, that's very exciting to the nervous system. The nervous system can be up and down constantly, right? So focus on being with someone who co-regulates. We didn't really get into the nervous system stuff and the importance of, co-regulating through touch, co-regulating through eye contact, co-regulating through breathing together. That's something we do with the couples when we're working with them, helping them co-regulate. But that's a really, really important thing to be focusing and putting your energy towards.
Very. Yes. Healthy relationships can feel really fucking boring. And, as I often ask people to ask themselves, with this excess energy you have, what do you want to create in your life? It's because we're in a healthy relationship and it is boring, not all the time, but, sometimes, as you said, it's a lot of routines, that I can, create a worldwide company. I am in the end result to make my company really big. Now, if I was in previous relationships with this back and forth and emotional roller coaster, you only have so much energy, even though you can, grow it and access it. But yeah, what do you want to do with the energy when you no longer have to prove yourself and questioning right, left, and center where your partner stands and what's going on? Create some really cool things.
Exactly. And I think we'll finish up there, a little hour for people. Obviously, I know, but also where can the listeners find out more about you, listen to you, watch you, work with you?
On Instagram. So my handle is Coach with Åsa. It's spelled ASA. It's a very unusual Swedish name, popular in the 1970s. Drop me a DM, and I don't know when this episode is coming out, but independently or what time, I run a lot of workshops, programs, one-to-one. So come and have a chat. Just let me know how it landed, what resonated for you. I would love to know.
Yeah, so also has a program, your program that's starting soon.
Yes, so I have a 8-week group coaching program called Unapologetic. Is to heal your inner good girl people pleaser and find the freedom of you, and to live your truth. And that is how you will also attract a partner. I also run the Courageous Woman, which is a 12-month membership where I will teach you how to attract a conscious man. So that's some of the things that's going on.
And as we mentioned before, we work with couples. So if this episode's resonates with you and some of the issues you're facing are things you'd like to tackle, then, please get in contact with us. Yes. Here, because we should be able to help you. All the details will be down in the show notes. Well, thank you, listeners. Thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for absorbing our information. We're going to make a little skedaddle. But did you want to say something else?
No, just thank you for having me, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, listeners. Until next week, ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. It's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, oh, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if, you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.